let me give you a perfect example of how a judgment call defense fell flat and it destroyed the defense's case. The gentleman was 37 years old. He was having difficulty urinating. He went to a urologist here in New York City who did a procedure known as a cold knife urethrotomy, where they stick a small scalpel into the penis, into the tube that transmits urine from the bladder out through the penis. And it is as painful as it sounds. Okay? And now that fixed him for a couple of days, but he developed the problem again. He goes back to the urologist who says, let's do this again. And that worked for another few days. And finally the urologist says, okay, this is really a Band-Aid. Let's try and do something more permanent. I want you to come into the hospital. We'll put you under general anesthesia. And I'm going to insert into your urethra, the tube that transmits the urine, a device known as a metal stent. And it's a spring-loaded coiled device. And the whole purpose is that when you put it in, when you release it, it pops open. And the whole goal is to keep that tube open to allow urine to pass through without a problem. This gentleman had scar tissue that kept building up in his urethra. The patient said, okay, let's do it. So now, that was problem number one. The choice by the doctor to go ahead and tell him to do this. The other thing I want you to keep in mind is the age of this gentleman. He's 37 years old, and I'll tell you why that's an important point in a moment. During the procedure, the doctor realizes, you know what? I'm going to put in 2 of these metal stents back to back. There's enough room. I think it'll help keep this urethra open. That's what he does. So now the patient is woken up. The procedure goes fine. Within hours after the anesthesia wears off, the patient begins to experience tremendous pain in his groin area, in the penis. And the doctor tells him, don't worry, you'll get used to it, take some pain medication, not a problem. Okay? But this gets worse and worse. And it gets worse in the mornings when he wakes up with an erection, before he goes to the bathroom. And it gets worse during the day when he does develop an erection. It gets so bad, the pain becomes so excruciating and so agonizing that at one time in the doctor's office notes, the patient is relaying to him what the problems are. He tells him, the pain is so horrible, I'm thinking of committing suicide when this happens. And the doctor wrote that down and recorded that. So now, it's getting worse and worse. And finally, after about 2 months, by the way, this metal stent is intended to be permanent. The skin tissue inside the urethra grows over the metal stent and it literally becomes embedded in there. It's designed to stay in there. So now 2 months later, after these ongoing agonizing complaints of pain, the urologist says, you know what? Maybe I take you back into the operating room. I'm going to try and move it away from where I think it's putting pressure on the nerve. The patient says, do something, do anything. Okay. So here's where judgment call number 2 comes in. The doctor goes in to do and manipulate this device. And what he encounters immediately is that this device is now permanent. As he tries to tug it and move it, he realizes that this has now become embedded within the urethra. And as he's attempting to try and move it and manipulate it, the metal pieces begin shearing off. It becomes thread-like, sharp metal pieces, and he's pulling it out piece by piece by piece. Thankfully, this gentleman is under anesthesia. Okay? But when he finishes, the doctor realizes that there's no way that this device can stay in. He's got to take both of them out. And the patient wakes up, he's in horrible pain, and he ultimately sees a urological reconstructive surgeon who takes a look inside and says to him, oh my God, it looks like a bomb went off in your urethra. What happened to you? Now, this reconstructive surgeon had to spend the next 1.5 years fixing this gentleman's problem where he had to reconstruct the inside of his penis. Horrible, horrible situation. But while this is healing, they couldn't allow the urine to come out of there because that would not allow this reconstruction to heal. So they had to create a diversion for the urine to come out. And where did they create it? They had to make a hole between his anus and his scrotum. And every time he had to urinate, he had to sit down. And this is disgusting. And this went on for an entire 1.5 years until he was finally healed. So we wound up bringing a lawsuit against the urologist. And this is a long-winded way of me explaining to you how this judgment call scenario came into play. The doctor, in his defense, turns around and says, based upon my educated decision, it was my judgment call to utilize this device for this gentleman. And not just one of these stents, but two back to back. Well, that would be fine if utilizing this device was within acceptable medical standards. Every medical expert I consulted said, yes, this device is appropriate for a gentleman who is over the age of 65 who no longer has the ability to maintain an erection. Why? Because the medical studies showed that every time someone has an erection using this device, they have horrible, excruciating, agonizing pain. How old was this guy? 37 years old. The choice by this doctor to utilize this device in a gentleman 37 years old was a departure from good and accepted medical practice. The fact that he put in two of these stents back to back was a departure from good medical practice. The fact that this guy tried to manipulate and pull it out after 2 months of pain was a departure, a violation from the basic standards of medical practice. This case did not go to trial because the defense realized that their argument that this was a good judgment call would never, ever work at the time of trial. So I share that story with you just to give you an insight and an understanding into how these judgment call defenses are used, sometimes very successfully, but in this case it was not.